Go ahead and tear the place apart. It is not like anyone is going to care about her, Sergeant Daniel Whitaker said with a smug laugh, completely unaware that the quiet black woman standing in front of him had already built the case that would cost him everything. What he believed was just another routine show of force would soon turn into a $10 million lawsuit that would destroy not just his career, but everyone who followed him through that door. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning on Willow Creek Lane in Augusta, Georgia unfolded with a quiet rhythm that rarely changed. Sunlight filtered gently through the tall oak trees lining the street, casting soft shadows across well-kept lawns and modest homes that had stood unchanged for years. At the very end of the block sat a small blue house, simple, unassuming, the kind of place most people passed without a second glance. Inside that house lived Loretta Mae Johnson. She moved through her morning slowly, deliberately, as if every action had been measured long before it was taken. The kettle on the stove gave a soft whistle as she poured hot water into a cup, the faint scent of tea drifting through the room. She carried it to the table and sat down, her posture straight, her movements precise, as though even the smallest detail mattered. To anyone outside, she would seem ordinary, a heavy-set woman living alone, quiet, predictable, invisible. But the inside of her home told a different story. Along the walls, framed documents hung in perfect alignment, their edges carefully adjusted, each one placed with intention. A locked cabinet stood in the corner of the living room, untouched but never neglected, its presence subtle but deliberate. Loretta opened a small notebook resting beside her cup, her eyes scanning lines of neatly written notes, dates, names, observations. Her expression did not change, but there was focus there, a quiet intensity that suggested something far deeper than routine. Outside, a neighbor walked past, barely glancing toward her house. A car rolled slowly down the street, then disappeared around the corner. Life continued as it always had, moving around her without noticing. Loretta closed the notebook gently, placing it back in its exact position, her fingers lingering for just a moment before withdrawing. She looked toward the window, not with concern, not with anticipation, but with awareness, as if she already understood something the rest of the world had yet to see. The calm inside that house was not fragile. It was deliberate, and though nothing had changed yet, though the street remained quiet and undisturbed, there was already something waiting just beneath the surface, something that would soon turn that quiet morning into a moment no one on Willow Creek Lane would forget. Across town, inside a cluttered precinct office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper, Sergeant Daniel Whitaker leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had done this too many times to question it anymore. A thin file lay open on his desk, barely filled, its contents vague, incomplete, and yet in his mind, more than enough. Anonymous tip, he said, tapping the page with a pen, his tone dismissive. Possible illegal activity. Suspicious patterns. Officer Briggs stood nearby, arms crossed, his brow slightly furrowed. "That is all we have?" he asked. Whitaker smirked, leaning forward now, his posture shifting from relaxed to decisive. "That is all we need," he replied. The room held a brief silence, not agreement, but hesitation that no one was willing to voice out loud. Whitaker stood, adjusting his uniform with a sharp motion, already moving past doubt. "We're going in," he said. "Full entry. I want 10 officers. I want presence." Officer Cole glanced up from across the room. 10? For one house. Whitaker shrugged, already reaching for his radio. "You would be surprised what people hide," he said, his tone carrying quiet implication. He pressed the button. All units, coordinated response. 10 officers. Roll out in 5. The order was given as if it were routine, as if it were justified, as if the outcome had already been decided before anyone stepped foot near that house. Outside, engines turned over one by one, patrol cars coming to life in a sequence that felt less like preparation and more like a show of force. Back on Willow Creek Lane, the quiet morning still held, undisturbed, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a passing car, the same calm rhythm that had defined the street for years. Inside her home, Loretta Mae Johnson stood near the window now, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her gaze steady as the faint sound began to reach her, distant at first, almost blending into the background of normal life. But it grew, louder, closer, not one engine, several, moving together, controlled, intentional. She did not rush. She did not react with alarm. She simply observed, her eyes narrowing slightly as the first patrol car turned onto the street, followed by another and another, until the quiet lane was filled with flashing lights and heavy movement. Doors slammed. Boots hit pavement. Voices carried sharply through the air. Neighbors stepped out onto porches. Curtains shifted. The calm fractured completely. Loretta turned from the window and walked slowly toward the front door, her posture unchanged, her breathing even, her presence steady in a way that did not match the chaos building outside. The pounding came suddenly, loud and aggressive, shaking the door with each udar. "Police! Open up!" Whitaker's voice cut through the air, sharp, commanding, already assuming compliance. A second udar followed, harder, more forceful. The frame trembled. Inside, Loretta reached the door, her hand resting lightly near the handle. She did not open it immediately. She did not speak. She simply stood there for a moment longer, as if acknowledging the exact point where everything had already crossed a line. And as the third udar struck, heavier than the last, it became clear that what was about to happen was no longer a question of permission, but of consequence. The third udar did not sound like a knock anymore. It sounded like a decision, heavy, final, echoing through the walls of the house just as the frame gave way under force, splintering inward with a sharp crack that shattered the last trace of quiet. Sergeant Daniel Whitaker stepped in first, his presence immediate, loud, filling the space with authority that had not been granted, only taken. "Police! Do not move!" he barked, though Loretta Mae Johnson was already standing still, her hands visible, her posture calm, her expression unchanged. Behind him, the rest of the officers flooded in, boots striking the floor in rapid succession, their movements aggressive, invasive, turning the carefully ordered home into chaos within seconds. Drawers were yanked open, cabinets slammed against their hinges. Papers were scattered across the floor as if their placement had never mattered. Loretta did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned slightly, her gaze moving from one officer to another, observing, recording, remembering. Whitaker circled her slowly, his eyes sharp, searching not for evidence, but for confirmation of the story he had already written in his mind. "Where is it?" he demanded, his tone low but edged with accusation. Loretta met his gaze calmly. "Where is what?" she asked. The question irritated him instantly. "Do not play games," he snapped, stepping closer, his presence pressing into her space. "We know you are hiding something." Behind him, Officer Briggs overturned a small table, its contents crashing onto the floor. Another officer pulled open a cabinet with such force that the door bounced violently. The house echoed with disruption, every sound louder than necessary, every movement more forceful than required. "You are making a mistake," Loretta said softly. The words were not loud, but they carried, cutting through the noise with quiet clarity. Whitaker let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "No," he replied. "We are fixing one." He turned sharply toward the others. "Search everything," he ordered. "I want every room cleared." Officers pushed past Loretta without acknowledgement, shoulders brushing against her, as if she were part of the furniture they were already dismantling. One officer knocked over a stack of neatly arranged documents, the papers sliding across the floor in disarray. Another opened drawers and dumped their contents without looking. Through it all, Loretta remained still, her breathing even, her presence unchanged. Whitaker watched her closely, his irritation growing not from resistance, but from the absence of it. "You are awfully calm for someone in this situation," he said, folding his arms. Loretta tilted her head slightly. I do not see a reason to be anything else, she replied. The answer lingered, unsettling in its simplicity. Behind them, another crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a voice calling out, "Nothing here." The reports came back empty, one after another, each one tightening the atmosphere rather than easing it. Whitaker's jaw clenched. "Keep looking," he snapped. "You're not digging deep enough." The noise continued, but something else had begun to form beneath it. Something quieter, something more precise. And standing in the center of her home, surrounded by chaos that did not belong to her, Loretta Mae Johnson remained exactly who she had always been, calm, steady, and watching, as if she already understood how this moment would end. The noise inside the house did not settle. It sharpened, each movement growing more careless, more forceful, as if the absence of immediate results only pushed Sergeant Daniel Whitaker further into the narrative he refused to abandon. "Check the back rooms," he barked, his voice cutting sharply through the overlapping sounds of drawers being emptied and cabinets slamming open. Officers moved quickly, boots heavy against the floor, their presence overwhelming, their actions no longer investigative but invasive. A chair was pushed aside too roughly. A stack of books fell to the ground. The quiet order of the home unraveled piece by piece. In the middle of it all, Loretta Mae Johnson remained still, her posture upright, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. She did not try to stop them. She did not argue. She simply watched. In the hallway, Officer Cole forced open a door with unnecessary force, the handle striking the wall with a sharp crack. "Clear," he called out. Another voice followed from a bedroom. "Nothing here." The words echoed back, empty, offering no confirmation, no justification. Whitaker's jaw tightened as he stepped further into the living room, his eyes scanning the space again, slower this time, searching for something that would restore his certainty. Then his gaze stopped. The locked cabinet in the corner. It stood untouched, undisturbed, its presence quiet but deliberate, a contrast to everything else in the room. "What is in there?" he demanded, nodding toward it. Loretta followed his gaze, then returned her eyes to him. "Personal records," she said calmly. The answer irritated him immediately. "Open it," he said. Loretta did not move. "There is no reason to," she replied. The refusal, simple as it was, landed harder than anything else she had said. Whitaker stepped closer, his voice lowering, more dangerous now. "I said open it." Loretta held his gaze, her expression unchanged. "You already decided what you were going to do when you came through that door," she said. "So do not pretend this is about permission." For a brief moment, the room held still. Then Whitaker exhaled sharply, turning toward Officer Briggs. "Break it." Briggs stepped forward, applying force to the lock until it snapped with a dull crack. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside, rows of neatly organized files filled the space, each one aligned with careful precision, untouched by the chaos surrounding them. Whitaker reached in, pulling out a folder, flipping it open quickly. His eyes scanned the contents, his expression tightening, not with confusion, but with something else, recognition without understanding. Names, dates, reports, patterns. He flipped another page, then another. The noise behind him continued, but it felt different now, thinner, less certain. Behind him, Loretta spoke, her voice quiet, controlled, carrying across the room without effort. "You should be careful with those," she said. "They are originals." Whitaker did not respond immediately. His grip on the folder tightened slightly, the weight of what he was holding beginning to register, even if he refused to acknowledge it. And for the first time since he had forced his way into that house, something inside him shifted, not enough to stop him, but enough to remind him that this situation was no longer unfolding the way he had expected. Whitaker stood there a moment longer, the folder still open in his hands, his eyes scanning the pages again, as if repetition might restore the certainty he had lost. But instead, the details only seemed to settle deeper. Names he recognized, dates that aligned too cleanly, incidents that felt uncomfortably familiar. He snapped the folder shut and turned abruptly, his expression hardening as he faced Loretta Mae Johnson once more. "What is this supposed to be?" he demanded, holding the folder up slightly as if it were something he could dismiss simply by questioning it. Loretta's gaze moved calmly to the file, then back to him. "A record," she said. The simplicity of the answer irritated him more than anything else in the room. "A record of what?" he pressed, stepping closer, his voice rising just enough to reclaim the authority he felt slipping. Behind him, the search continued, but without direction now. Drawers opened more slowly, movements less certain, as if even the officers could feel the shift taking place. "Of patterns," Loretta replied softly. Whitaker let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You think this means something?" he said, flipping the folder open again, his finger tapping against the pages. "You think writing things down protects you?" Loretta did not react. "It clarifies things," she said. "Later." The word lingered in the air, quiet but deliberate. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He tossed the folder back into the cabinet with unnecessary force, the papers inside shifting slightly as if disturbed by his refusal to understand. "All I see is paper," he said sharply. Loretta took a single step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, but measured. "That is because you are looking at it too early," she replied. The room grew quieter, not silent, but focused, the weight of her words settling into the space between movement and noise. Whitaker folded his arms, leaning slightly closer, his voice lowering again. "You are standing in the middle of a lawful search," he said, "with 10 officers in your home." Loretta held his gaze, her expression unchanged. "You came in without verifying your grounds," she said. "You forced entry. You documented everything for me." The statement landed differently this time, not as a warning, but as a fact that could not be undone. For a brief moment, something flickered in Whitaker's eyes, hesitation, recognition, something that did not belong to him. Then it disappeared, buried beneath the same arrogance that had brought him here. "We will see about that," he replied. He turned sharply toward the others. "Finish it," he ordered. Officers resumed their movements, but the energy had changed, their actions now driven by obligation rather than certainty. One officer brushed past Loretta too roughly, knocking in her shoulder as he moved toward the hallway. She adjusted her balance without complaint, her posture steady, her gaze forward. The noise returned, but it no longer carried authority. It sounded hollow, and standing in the center of it all, Whitaker waited for something to confirm his version of reality, something to restore the control he believed he still had. But nothing came, and in that absence, something far more dangerous than resistance began to take hold, the quiet realization that this moment was no longer unfolding the way he intended. The noise in the house had begun to fade, not because the search was complete, but because there was nothing left to justify it. And Sergeant Daniel Whitaker stood in the center of the living room with attention he could no longer disguise as authority. "That is enough," he said finally, his voice clipped, sharp, trying to reassert control over a situation that had already slipped beyond him. Officers slowed, their movements losing urgency, their actions no longer driven by certainty but by habit. Drawers remained open, furniture displaced, the quiet order of the home reduced to evidence of something that could not be. Undone. Whitaker reached for his notepad, flipping it open with a quick motion, his pen pressing firmly against the page, as if force alone could make his version of events real. "We are documenting this," he said, not looking at Loretta, "and if we get another call, we will be back." Loretta Mae Johnson stood a few feet away, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, her gaze calm. "You should document everything carefully," she said. Whitaker paused briefly, glancing up with a faint smirk. "I always do," he replied. Loretta took a single step forward, her voice still soft, but carrying something deeper now, something final. "Make sure you include how you entered," she said. "What you broke, what you touched, what you said." The room quieted just enough for the words to settle. One officer near the hallway slowed his movement. Another glanced up, then looked away again. Whitaker's smirk tightened slightly, though he forced it to remain. "You think that matters?" he asked. Loretta held his gaze. "It will," she said. A brief silence followed, heavier than before, stretching just long enough to suggest something unseen had already shifted. Whitaker exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he tore the page from his pad. "You're not in a position to threaten anything," he said, stepping closer, his voice lowering, colder now. "You are standing in a house we just searched with 10 officers. Loretta did not move. "I'm standing in a house you just documented," she replied. The distinction landed quietly, but it carried weight. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, hesitation, recognition, something he almost acknowledged. Then it disappeared. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. "We are done here," he said, turning toward the door. Loretta's voice came one last time, calm, steady, final. "You still have time to leave correctly," she said. Whitaker stopped for a fraction of a second, his back to her, the weight of that sentence pressing into the moment. Then he let out a short laugh, dismissive, shaking his head. "No," he said, "I think I will leave exactly how I want." And with that, he stepped through the doorway, taking with him the last opportunity to undo what had already been set into motion, leaving behind a silence that no longer belonged to him, but to the consequences that were already on their way. Whitaker had just stepped onto the porch when the sound reached him, not loud, not chaotic, but deliberate, controlled, the unmistakable approach of multiple vehicles moving with purpose. He paused mid-step, his hand still resting near the doorframe, something in the rhythm of those engines forcing him to turn back. The street that had once been quiet now shifted again, but this time, not with chaos, with precision. Dark sedans pulled in one after another, parking with measured control. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out, their posture composed, their presence carrying authority that did not need to be announced. The officers who had followed Whitaker out slowed instinctively, their movements uncertain now, their earlier confidence gone. "What is this?" Whitaker muttered, his voice no longer sharp, no longer certain. The answer came without urgency. Attorney Malcolm Pierce stepped forward, his gaze steady as it moved from the officers to the house, then finally to Whitaker. "Sergeant Daniel Whitaker," he said, his voice calm, precise, "you are being placed under investigation for unlawful entry, excessive force, and violation of civil rights." The words landed clean, final. Whitaker blinked, his expression tightening as he tried to process what was happening, his eyes flicking back toward the doorway behind him, as if expecting something to anchor him back into control. Instead, Loretta Mae Johnson stepped forward, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, her gaze calm. She held a folder in her hands now, one of the same files he had dismissed moments earlier. "These are copies," she said softly. "The originals have already been submitted." The street went still. Even the distant sounds seemed to fade. Whitaker stared at her, his mouth opening slightly, but no words forming. The realization came too quickly, too completely. "You set this up," he said, though the words lacked strength. Loretta shook her head once. "No," she replied. "You completed it." Behind him, one of the officials stepped forward. "Turn around," he said. This time, the command did not need to be repeated. Whitaker hesitated for only a fraction of a second, his shoulders lowering as the weight of everything settled fully into place. Slowly, he turned. The same motion he had demanded from others now felt different, heavier, unavoidable. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp click. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Neighbors stood at a distance, watching their earlier. Curiosity replaced by something else, something closer to understanding. The officers who had followed him stood silent, their presence diminished, their authority gone. Whitaker lowered his head slightly, the last traces of defiance slipping away. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly. Loretta's voice came one last time, calm, steady. "No," she said. "You decided what your job was." The distinction settled into the moment with quiet finality. And as Whitaker was led away, the truth stood clear, not shouted, not forced, but undeniable. The power he believed he carried had never been his. It had only been waiting for the moment to be taken back. The click of the cuffs around Sergeant Daniel Whitaker's wrists did not echo loudly, but it carried a weight that silenced the entire street, a quiet, undeniable shift that no one could ignore. He stood there, hands secure behind his back, his posture no longer rigid with authority, but lowered, uncertain, as if the ground beneath him had changed without warning. "You are being detained, pending formal charges," one of the officials said, his voice calm, procedural, leaving no room for argument. Whitaker swallowed, his throat tightening as the reality settled in. Not all at once, but in fragments that built into something overwhelming. Around him, the other officers stood frozen, their earlier confidence gone, replaced by stillness, by the uncomfortable understanding that what they had participated in had crossed a line they could not step back from. One officer lowered his gaze. Another took a step back, as if distancing himself from a moment. The authority they had carried into that house had dissolved completely. Attorney Malcolm Pierce stepped forward slightly, his tone measured, precise. "Everything that occurred inside that residence has been documented," he said. "Body cameras, witness statements, property damage, unlawful entry. There is no ambiguity here." Each word landed with clarity, stripping away the last fragile layer of denial Whitaker might have held on to. I was acting on a report," Whitaker said quietly, his voice no longer carrying command, only explanation. Loretta Mae Johnson stood a few feet away, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, calm, stoic, commanding in a way that required no effort. "You acted on assumption," she replied. The distinction settled into him with quiet finality. The officials guided him forward, each step controlled, deliberate, as they led him away from the porch, away from the house he had entered with force and arrogance just minutes earlier. Now, every step he took felt heavier, slower, as if each movement carried the weight of what he had done. The neighbors who had watched from a distance now stood in silence, their attention no longer curious, but sober, understanding. Phones remained raised, capturing the moment, but the energy had shifted. This was no longer spectacle. This was consequence. As Whitaker was led toward one of the vehicles, his head lowered, his presence diminished, the contrast became unmistakable. The man who had commanded 10 officers now moved under direction, his authority gone, his voice quiet. The door opened, and he was placed inside without resistance. It closed with a firm, controlled finality. Behind him, the officers who had followed him stood in place, their roles uncertain now, their presence no longer defined by power. Malcolm Pierce turned slightly, his gaze returning to Loretta, offering a subtle nod that carried respect, acknowledgement, and closure. Loretta returned the nod with the same calm dignity she had shown from the beginning. She did not step forward. She did not speak further. She did not need to. The outcome spoke clearly enough. And as the vehicles began to pull away, carrying Whitaker and the consequences of his actions with them, the balance that had been broken was restored, not with noise, not with force, but with a precision that left no doubt. Justice had not arrived suddenly. It had been waiting all along. As the last vehicle carrying Sergeant Daniel Whitaker disappeared from Willow Creek Lane, the streets slowly exhaled, the tension that had gripped it dissolving into a calm that felt deeper than the quiet that had existed before. The flashing lights were gone. The sharp voices had faded. What remained was something steadier, something restored. Neighbors who had stood at a distance began to retreat back into their homes, their expressions no longer curious, but thoughtful, as if they had witnessed something they would not easily forget. Inside the house, the damage remained, drawers still open, furniture slightly out of place, papers scattered across the floor, but the chaos no longer felt dominant. It felt temporary. Loretta Mae Johnson stood in the center of the room, her posture unchanged, her presence calm, stoic, commanding, just as it had been before the first knock on her door. She looked around, slowly, taking in every detail, not with frustration, not with anger, but with quiet acknowledgement. Each broken line of order was not just damage. It was evidence. It was purpose fulfilled. Attorney Malcolm Pierce spoke softly with the officials near the doorway, his tone measured, ensuring that every detail was preserved, every action accounted for. The system had begun to move, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet precision it was meant to have all along. One of the officials stepped aside as Loretta moved forward, offering a subtle nod of respect. She returned it with the same calm dignity, her movements unhurried as she bent down, gathering a stack of scattered papers and aligning them carefully, restoring their order one piece at a time. The simple act carried weight. It was not about cleaning. It was about control returning to where it belonged. Sunlight filtered through the window again, casting soft patterns across the floor, touching the edges of the room just as it had that morning. The same light, the same space. But something had changed. Loretta walked toward the window, adjusting the curtain gently, allowing the warmth to fill the room completely. Outside, the street had returned to its quiet rhythm. A car passed. Leaves rustled. Life continued. She returned to the table where her notebook rested, exactly where she had left it. Opening it, she glanced briefly at the last entry, then picked up her pen and continued writing, her hands steady, her movements precise. There was no rush, no lingering tension, only continuation. The world outside would move on, as it always did. But inside that house, at the end of that quiet street, something had been made clear in a way that could not be undone. And as Loretta Mae Johnson sat there, calm and unchanged, it became evident that nothing about her had shifted at all. Only the truth around her had been revealed, and now it remained exactly where it belonged. What makes this story resonate so deeply is not the scale of the consequence, but the quiet precision that led to it. Sergeant Whitaker believed that authority could be established through volume, through numbers, through force, as if control could be created simply by overwhelming a situation. But Loretta Mae Johnson understood something far more enduring. She understood that power, when it is rooted in patience and clarity, does not need to react in the moment. It observes, it records, it waits. What ultimately brought Whitaker down was not a single decision, but a series of small choices he dismissed as insignificant, each one building toward an outcome he never saw coming. There is something revealing about how easily people rely on the absence of immediate consequences to justify their actions. In this case, that absence was not permission. It was preparation. And when the result finally arrived, it did not argue, it did not negotiate. It simply reflected everything back with exact precision. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.